capabilities. But before I introduce our speaker, I want to just first say a few words that I'm asked to in terms of some housekeeping things, and I'll speak a little bit about the partnership and invite my colleague to speak briefly and then introduce our speaker for this afternoon. So as a reminder to folks, or as a point of information for others, this event is also being live streamed to our viewers and colleagues in Bologna at the University of Unibo and beyond, who are very interested in this topic and this conversation today. So we're glad that they're also able to join us as well. Brown and Bologna, and the University of Bologna specifically, have had a very long-standing history of partnership that spans over 4 decades of collaborations across multiple fields in the humanities and engineering and physics and biology and medicine. This rich history of collaboration, exchange, and mobility has always included both students and faculty, both exchanges in terms of going back and forth, but also in terms of the research collaboration that has also led to multiple seminars, tutorials, and in fact inviting graduate students to also participate in labs and other activities here in College Hill. We're also incredibly proud of the fact that Brown administers a global center focused on study abroad for undergraduate students in Bologna that is in fact generously housed by the University of Bologna, that enables Brown students to take courses at the University of Bologna and has been since 1982 and is one of our oldest and most consistently running study abroad centers that was founded by the faculty of the Department of Italian Studies here at Brown, including Professor Riva, whose leadership we're very grateful for, among many others. And so this lecture series, as I mentioned, is an annual lecture series that takes place and alternates between institutions every year. And that has been ongoing since 2018. And so before I invite my colleague to come up and say a few words, I also want to thank some colleagues and departments that were part of this important event and planning, as well as subsequent events and activities to follow for our guests. And so my great thanks to the Department of History, Department of Italian Studies, the Center for Middle East Studies, and the Center for Global Antiquity. And so now I'm going to invite my colleague, who is here both representing the University of Bologna's Vice Rector for Internationalization, and who has also been one of the key champions of our partnership and long-running collaboration. So without any further ado, please allow me in welcoming my colleague, Professor Daniela.
Thank you, Paloma. Thank you, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's the second time for me. I've been here also 2 years ago, and I'm here to represent also the Vice Rector for International Relations, Professor Raffaella Campaner, and I would like to give you the best greetings also from our Rector, Professor Giovanni Molari. It's really a pleasure to introduce and to be here also for this lecture. As also Paloma said, the Brown Unibo agreement is one of the oldest of our agreement. It dates back to 1983, and the Unibo Brown lecture series started in 2017. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here and to attend the lecture of the colleague, Professor Matteo Martelli, and really excited to hear this lecture and to see you here. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Professor Daniela Cavalcoli. And now it is my great honor to introduce our keynote. Professor Matteo Martelli is a professor in the history of science at the University of Bologna, where he teaches the history of ancient science and technology, along with the history of ancient medicine. His research focuses on Greco-Roman and Byzantine science with particular attention to alchemy and medicine, pharmacology, and his reception in the Syro-Arabic tradition. His publications include the 4 books on Pseudo-Democritus, published in 2014, and Collecting Recipes, Byzantine and Jewish Pharmacology in Dialogue, published in 2017, and edited with Lamhias. The Alchemist East project, which he's currently working on, is a critical edition and translation of the alchemical books by Zosimus of Panopolis, as they are represented in the Syrian tradition. And without any further ado, please help me in welcoming Professor Martelli for his lecture.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and thank you everybody for being here, actually. And first of all, I would like to thank also the organizers here in the Brown and in Bologna for giving me the opportunity to share part of my research on the history of ancient alchemy. So, today, I will frame my presentation around 3 main themes: matter, bodies, and text. These 3 themes offer us different perspectives to look at how ancient practitioners engaged with and transformed the natural world. Let me begin with matter. Matter is always in flux. It changes naturally, but it can also be transformed by human skill. Ancient alchemists were well aware of this fluidity. They devised and collected a wide range of techniques for exploiting, transforming, and at times even enhancing the material world. My research tries to decode and reconstruct these practices as well as the way they were conceptualized by ancient practitioners. This leads to the second theme, bodies. In antiquity, the boundaries between living and non-living matter were often fluid. Metals, for instance, were described as living or even as ensouled bodies that could be nurtured and transformed. At the same time, the body of the practitioner was central in the alchemical, practice. It was through hands-on engagement in the workshop that knowledge was produced and tested. These embodied experiences shaped how alchemists reasoned about substances, about their color, texture, volatility, solubility, and also capacity to combine. Finally, let me turn to text. Texts are not only vehicles of technical instructions, but also material artifacts shaped by scribes, copyists, and translators across centuries. Texts are living bodies of knowledge, changing as they circulated across cultural and linguistic boundaries. I made the first attempt to explore and investigate part of this rich textual tradition in the framework of my ERC project, Alchemist. You can read the full title of the project in this slide. And the first aim of the project was to challenge a bit the traditional view of alchemy as a medieval and mostly European science. Indeed, pre-medieval alchemy has a very long-lasting tradition which encompassed a wide set of chemical crafts. Along with the quest for metallic transmutation, this is what usually we associate to alchemy, so how to transmute, base metals into silver or gold, we also have a very wide array of technologies for manipulating and transforming natural substances, as well as for dyeing metals, textiles, and stones. The first traces of these chemical and experimental crafts can be already detected in the Babylonian tradition, in the Babylonian world, and further developed in the Greco-Roman Egypt, in the Byzantine and Syro-Arabic traditions. Moreover, The project assumes that the most important material for understanding ancient alchemical theories and practices is not abstract theory. Instead, it lies in the collections of recipes and technical compendia that survive in several traditions, from ancient Babylonian to the Islamicate world. Rather than focusing on the more formal sciences like geometry, mathematics, or astronomy, my research turns to procedural knowledge, knowledge that is less formalized but deeply practical. You may notice that these ancient recipes, often anonymous and passed across multiple languages and cultures, reflect a very different approach to science. They are not about axioms or proofs. They are about what happens when you mix, grind, heat, or dissolve a substance in the workshop. In this respect, the recipe collections represent an immense archive of empirical experience. These texts accumulated over centuries, crossing political and linguistic boundaries. As I hope we will show you in the lecture, they reveal just how important practical, hands-on knowledge was for the development of ancient science. But let me give you a concrete example now. For instance, an especially rich tradition developed around the use of sulfur and sulfur-based solutions to dye metals, especially silver, and make them similar to gold. We will see an experiment on this technology at the end of the lecture. This technology can be traced all the way back to cuneiform tablets, especially two tablets kept at the British Museum and dating to the mid-2nd millennium BC. Much later, you can see, the table here. Okay. Much later, in a 3rd century Greco-Egyptian papyrus of alchemical recipes, the Leiden papyrus, here, we find the first explicit recipes to make a sulfur-based solution. And basically, since in Greek the term for sulfur is theion, it means also divine, this kind of chemical solution is also called divine water in the alchemical literature. And a similar set of recipes also appear in other traditions, for instance, in this unpublished Syriac manuscript that also encompasses the Syriac books of Zosimus that I'm editing at the moment in the framework of the ERC project. We can find several recipes on the making of sulfur or divine waters. I think these examples show how a single technology could travel, transform, and acquire new meanings across different cultures and centuries. In order to grasp a better understanding of this technical literature, within the alchemist framework, we applied a multidisciplinary approach to the study of ancient chemical arts, which combines textual, historical, and experimental reconstructions. We explored different fields of ancient chemical technology in close collaboration with the Department of Chemistry at the University of Bologna, and especially with Professor Lucia Maini and with Marianna Marchini and Giacomo Montanari. And these are basically all the chemists without whom it would be impossible to do all the experiment I will show you in this lecture. For instance, we extensively studied the chemistry of mercury, a pivotal substance for the development of alchemical practices and theories. I'm pleased to mention just a couple of works that we published in chemical journals. This is Exploring the Ancient Chemistry of Mercury, published in PNAS, and the second one is What Makes Every Work Perfect is Cooking and Grinding. This is a quotation from an alchemical text, The Ancient Roots of Mechanochemistry. And the ancient alchemists, indeed, were fascinated by mercury, the liquid metal that easily combines with others, especially with gold. They also understood its connection with cinnabar, the red mineral from which metallic mercury could be extracted. Over the centuries, they developed increasingly sophisticated methods of extraction. The earliest known technique involving grinding cinnabar in a liquid, especially vinegar or even water, together with copper. This method was already described by classical authors such as Theophrastus and Pliny the Elder. Later on, the Greco-Egyptian alchemist Zosimus of Panopolis inherited this knowledge and experimented further, particularly with other metals, for instance with lead and tin. We can read, just to give you also a sense of an alchemical text, we can read a short passage from Zosimus of Panopolis, let's say work, these chapters to Eusebia, where he describes this technology. I think that it's better to grind cinnabar. In fact, different substances produce mercury or quicksilver, actually in Greek is the clod, where they are processed with water or vinegar in the sun. And we know this from experience. And every book, as well as Chimes and Maria say, lead mortar and lead pestle grind cinnabar with vinegar in the sun until mercury is formed or is produced. They do the same with tin. And actually these two, Chimes and Maria, there are two founders, let's say, of alchemy in the Greco-Egyptian world. So by testing this process in a modern laboratory, we can actually reproduce what the ancient alchemists described. If cinnabar is ground with copper in a liquid, the mineral turns into a black powder, but after a while, actually the first time we had to grind for almost 2 hours, so it was, and tiny drops of mercury begin to appear and coagulate. A similar reaction can also be obtained with tin. In this case, however, the mercury quickly amalgamates with the tin, producing this kind of silvery, pasty, and a bit sticky substance, this one. But I think at the eyes of the ancient alchemists, they regarded this substance as another kind of mercury, and we can basically see it also in the texts that they produced. In fact, the mobility of mercury and its ability to quickly amalgamate with other metals I think might have contributed to the idea that the liquid metal was somehow alive. The idea of mercury as a living being is reflected in ancient alchemical literature. In the Syriac tradition, for instance, we have a book devoted to mercury, and is not basically transmitted in Greek, but is transmitted in Syriac translation, is attributed to Zosimus. And in this book, Zosimus basically tries to classify different kinds of mercury, okay? This living mercury that comes from lead, coloring mercury coming from cinnabar, and this river water or dragon's bile that comes from tin. Now, especially for this last, this usually in the, let's say, in the historiography of alchemy, we refer to these names as code names or Decknamen. Actually, this is a kind of technical terms in German for these code names that were attributed to substances in the alchemical tradition. And this is a kind of feature of the alchemical tradition that we can already see in this ancient Greco-Roman literature. And especially for the last two names, river water and dragon's bile, Zosimus provides a kind of a theological account that explains why basically mercury from tin gets this kind of technical nomenclature, let's say. And this is the mythological account that we can read in the alchemical Syriac, in the Syriac book, that is quite long, but I think it's an intriguing text that is worth reading in full. In the further region of the west, where tin is located, there is a spring that gushes out and pulls it like water. When the inhabitants of this region see that it is ready to overflow out of the spring, they make a virgin girl of outstanding beauty stand naked in front of it. She stands in a lower place in front of a deep hole in the field, so that tin lasts after the beauty of the young girl. For it rushes upon her in a leap with the desire of take possession of her. but she's accustomed to running quickly, and there are young people who stand next to her bearing axes in their hands. As soon as they see it to get close to the girl, they beat and cut it, and it goes its way in that deep hole, and it congeals by itself and solidifies. They cut this tin to pieces and make use of it. That's why they give the name of river water to mercury that comes from tin. They use this name because it runs like water that flows away in the fields and is similar in shape to a rebel and bright dragon. Now, we must note that Mercury is quoted only at the end of this long passage, which is otherwise focused on tin. And this interest for tin can also be confirmed by the Arabic version of the same myth. This Arabic version is preserved in this book of pictures, of book of images, that is an Arabic dialogue between Zosimus and his pupil Theosebia. Basically, here we have the same story, but the story is located in Morocco, and we have an explicit mention of tin, basically this al-kasdir in Arabic, that is the main, let's say, the main topic of the account. But despite this difference, both versions depict tin or tin and mercury as living animals moved by intense sexual desire. Zosimus' mythological account mirrors a vitalistic understanding of the mineral world, which is vividly dramatized in the narrative. Tin mercury wells out of the spring where it resides and chases a beautiful maiden like a dragon until it is caught by men who cut it off and let it solidify in deep holes around the spring. Now, David Gordon White, this important Indologist actually working, I think, at the University of California, if I remember, pointed out that the Syriac passage must be compared with a rich dossier of Sanskrit and Chinese texts that provide a very similar account about the extraction of mercury. In the Indian tradition, mercury is identified with the semen of the god Shiva, which was dispersed in the river Ganges. The river, however, could not bear the heavy metal which was deposited on the side of the Himalaya, where it produced all the other metals in contact with the earth. The story is fully developed in several Sanskrit alchemical writings that date from the 13th to the early 17th century. You can see in the slide the earliest and the most recent Sanskrit titles of the Sanskrit text, basically including this story. Mercury, lodged in a well, rushes after a beautiful maiden who in most versions is riding a horse, and when Mercury goes back to the well, it remains trapped in natural depressions, in some version in pits dug by men of the land, where it solidifies. The story was depicted in many Mughal miniatures. You can see some of them here. This is from a private collection in Jaipur. From the City Palace in Jaipur. And we have, this is from a private collection. We have also black and white miniature with the same theme from the Louvre Museum in Paris. And here you have two other Mughal miniatures from the UK, the Bodleian Library and British Library. Now, if we want to add further elements to this mythology, a similar myth also appears in Chinese texts. Interestingly, in the Chinese version, the river of Mercury is located in a country that is called Fuling, a common Chinese word for Byzantium or Roman Syria. On the basis of this detail, already at the end of the 19th century, Ferdinand de Melly, a sinologist working in Paris, tentatively argued in favor of a Syriac origin of the Chinese account. I think that these examples show how alchemical procedures, nomenclature, and technical terminology could give rise to sophisticated and rich mythological accounts. These stories traveled across the world, across languages, across cultures, forming a kind of global network of knowledge while being reinterpreted and recontextualized within different cultural and religious traditions. The complexity of these cultural processes require a transdisciplinary approach, one that combines history, philology, material studies, and experimental reconstructions. As we have already seen, we are trying to integrate the reconstruction of ancient alchemical technologies into this approach as an additional heuristic tool. In other words, our method can be described as a circular hermeneutical approach or a circular hermeneutic. First, we critically edit the texts to record variant readings. Some variant readings are simple scribal errors. Other variant readings can be basically some kind of innovation that has been introduced into the text of a recipe. Then we examine the underlying chemistry and attempt to reproduce the procedures in the lab. After experiences the transformation firsthand, we return to the text to consider how these experiences shaped the thinking and writing of the ancient practitioners. As already noticed, in ancient alchemy, the lived experiences of manipulating materials shaped the mind of practitioners. It informed how they understood the properties of matter. The results of this embodied knowledge are preserved in ancient recipes, and experimental reconstruction do more than test if a single recipe works. So our main question when we start a reconstruction is not whether a recipe works, also because it's difficult to say what it means working for a recipe, of course. If we can get something that is similar to the result that is described in the recipe, this could be something that is working. But basically our question is a bit broader, if you want. We think that recipe offer a kind of windows into workshop practices and allow us to reconsider and to reconstruct, in a way, the experiences that ancient practitioners were basically having in the workshop. And in this way, we can better understand how these experiences were recorded and conceptualized in the texts. But let me give you a final example of this methodology that is about alchemical eggs. I think eggs played a very important role in ancient alchemical literature, both as a physical ingredient and as a cosmological and classificatory device. These multiple layers of meaning make it difficult to interpret their appearance in practical recipes. Sometimes the physical, I would say chemical properties of the egg's product were overshadowed by its symbolic meaning. For example, Shepard emphasized the symbolic role of the egg in alchemy, which, as he put it, would point to the mystical aspects of the alchemical work. More recently, Michel Mertens, the editor of Zosimus Alchemical Texts, highlights the strong cosmological meaning of the egg. At the same time, she notes that some technical texts on egg distillation clearly refer to real physical ingredients. Similarly, Taylor observes that Greek alchemy associates different parts of the egg with different substances. He interprets this as an attempt to explain how the egg represents the universe, the cosmos. This cosmological meaning is especially clear, for instance, in this anonymous Byzantine text with the title Nomenclature of the Eggs. This is indeed the mystery of the art. With the art, they mean, of course, alchemy. I can go through briefly the translation. They called the egg fourfold since it is imitation of the cosmos and includes the four elements. And they also call it the stone which the moon revolves, and the stone that is not a stone, the Aetites stone, the Alabastrites stone, these are difficult to identify, brain, sorry. And its shell, to which the element earth, cold and dry is similar, is called copper, iron, tin, and lead. The egg white is the divine water, the yolk is the vitriol, and its oil is the fire. Now, I think 2 points emerge from this passage. First, the egg is described as an imitation of the universe, of the cosmos. Its part, even if not explicitly named, can be interpreted as corresponding to the four elements of the universe. Traditionally, four parts of the egg were recognized in antiquity: the shell, membrane, white, and yolk. Of these parts, only the shell here is explicitly associated with the element earth. The other parts are linked to specific minerals or alchemical substances. Among these alchemical substances, the mention of divine water is particularly interesting. In fact, the earliest known text on the distillation of eggs is a detailed procedural work attributed to the Greek-Egyptian alchemist Zosimus, introduced by the title On the Same Divine Water. This text describes how to distill eggs to produce 3 different distillates of different colors, and these distillates are then mixed together, distilled again, and macerated, and the final product is used to transmute, so to transform silver into gold. So basically, this final product is a kind of transforming element that is called divine water and has this transmutative power of changing silver into gold. This transmutative power is linked to the divine water that is mentioned, as I said, in the title of the text. The beginning of the text is straightforward. We can read it. This is basically a kind of a practical instruction, a procedural text. Take as many eggs as you want, boil them, and after breaking them, remove all of their whites. Do not use their shells. Take a glass male and female vessel, which is called ambix, from which alembic, for instance, derives. Put their yolk in it according to the following weight. Add 2 silique of eggshells, which have been roasted to 1 ounce of yolks, neither more nor less than what has been written. After grinding, taking other eggs and breaking them, put them in a vessel along with the yolks that have been grinded, so that fresh eggs pile up on the top of the yolks. While presenting and summarizing this procedure, the text is very long. It's almost 3 pages of technical instructions, so we won't read first all the text, but I will show you some picture from our first attempts to reconstruct this technology, and I will summarize a bit the text that basically has guided us through these experiments. As you can see in this first slide, we began by taking the yolk of a boiled egg, we grind it, and then we had roasted eggshell and fresh egg. With these ingredients, we set up the distillatory apparatus here, this kind of the alembic, basically, the part that has a male and female, let's say, component. In the alchemical terminology, let's say, this is the female, this is the male, sorry, this is the female component of the alembic. And Zosimus then specifies that the alembic must be properly sealed and fitted with a receiver tightly connected to the distilling instruments. And basically, this is the receiver, okay? And the vessel was to be gently heated with the instruction that one should be able to touch the alembic with a bare hand without being burned. The author, moreover, insists that the smell produced during the distillation is the key element in the procedure. We have a very intriguing, actually, sentence in this long technical text, in which Zosimus explain, or at least give us actually an instruction, secure the joints of the instrument all round so that the smell is preserved. In fact, if it escapes, the art is lost. For the smell is very unpleasant, and this is indeed true, actually, but the smell is the art. Now, when the distillation is complete, the distillate is set aside, the alembic is opened, and the residue that is described as a dead scoria is collected from the vessel. These scoriae are then mixed with new yolks with the aim, as Zosimus explained it, to raise them from the dead. The mixture of dry scoriae and moist yolks is placed back into the alembic, and the process of distillation is repeated. This time, however, the receiver is changed so that the new distillate is correctly separated. The text basically instructs to repeat this operation 3 times in order to have 3 different distillates. You can see here, this is the text. We don't have to read all the section. Just the first sentence describes these 3 distillates. Do this procedure 3 times, and you will see that the first water is white, as it has been described, which also the ancients called rainwater. The second water is yellowish green, which the ancients also called reddish oil. The third water is blackish green, which they also called castor oil. And actually, here, for instance, in the slide, you can see that the white first distillate here, basically. And this is when we mix together basically the scoriae with the fresh yolk, and after the distillation we have the first distillate that is white. The second one you can see here is kind of yellow, if you want. And when we basically put the 3 distillates in 3 vials, I think the color that we reached, closely match the color described by Zosimus in the text. Then the 3 distillates are mixed together, macerated and distilled again in order to produce what basically Zosimus called a very divine water. Just not just a divine water, but something that is even more divine, okay? Which cannot be collected with bare hands, but only using a glass tool. The substance is applied on a piece of silver, which according to Zosimus' description becomes gold. In this slide, basically, you can see the final product of the distillation, what, according to Zosimus' text, is called this very divine water, okay? And this is the result of applying this distillate on a silver coin. And, okay, we can see that some parts of this coin becomes actually golden, a kind similar to the color of gold. Now, I will try to cut a short story, a long story short, basically. Then we can discuss it if you are curious in the Q&A session. But basically, this kind of technology is very similar to the technology that was described in the recipes on the production of sulfur water that we just mentioned at the beginning of this lecture. And basically, for preparing this sulfur water, or divine water, according to the text, we have to mix sulfur with quicklime, okay, to produce a red liquid. And when silver basically is dipped in this liquid, it becomes golden, or it takes this kind of golden color. You can see here basically the divine water as was produced in the lab, and here when a silver coin is dipped in this solution, the kind of color that it gets. And this is the result of a specific reaction of sulfur with silver, basically. It's difficult to catch the golden actually color because, but here there is a picture that maybe shows better. So to sum up with the eggs experiment, various elements of our experimental reconstruction, of course, need to be tested again and measured. However, the preliminary results already show how the text describes a laboratory procedure divided in many steps, some of which are marked by specific chromatic transformations. On the one hand, our text does not lack theoretical considerations that punctuate the various steps of the long distillation process. The author emphasized the importance of smell and speculates on the different results that can be achieved by combining dry and moist substances. These remarks, however, do not mention the 4 elements or the cosmic meaning of eggs. Instead, they seem to link the distillation procedure to the theoretical framework of divine water production, rather than to a kind of cosmological framework of distilling the 4 elements, unless we want to connect the color of the different distillates to the color of the elements. However, this reading is still very speculative, so I think we should better substantiate this hypothesis with further investigation. More in general, alchemical texts are complex artifacts. They merge practical instructions with symbolic and cosmological interpretations. Alongside simple and straightforward recipes, we find elaborate instructions and mythological accounts based on living technologies. Alchemical procedures circulated widely across culture, forming a truly global web of knowledge, while also being adapted to local traditions. With this lecture, I hope to have shown how combining philological study with experimental reconstruction, we can begin to recover not only the procedures themselves, but also the lived experiences and the intellectual frameworks of ancient practitioners. The circular hermeneutic that I try to explain, moving between texts, laboratories, and back again, offers us a unique way to better understand the interplay of matter, bodies, and text in the history of ancient alchemy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Martelli. That was fascinating. We have a few minutes, and we'd love to engage with your questions. I have a mic up here. My colleagues set for that aisle, and so if there are any questions from any of you.
Thank you so much. That was so much fun. I'm curious if there are examples of, after going through the experiments and experiencing it yourself, has that changed any of the way that you edit the critical editions that you're working on? I'm just curious if there's any examples
Absolutely.
of that.
Thank you. This was something that I didn't want to go, let's say, too deeply in my lecture, because it's very philological, as you know. But this was one of the ideas at the beginning of the project, to see whether these variant readings basically reflect a kind of knowledge that is updated over time, or is just a question of copying a text and a kind of mistake that is very common in scribal practices. Just in a couple of examples, we had the feeling that a variant text, a variant reading could reflect this kind of changes. In a way, in one text, there was at some point a kind of note about heating the substance or not heating it, and we noticed that by heating the substance, actually the process is quicker. So I think in that case, this may reflect the kind of knowledge that was discovered after the moment in which the recipe was first written. And there was a second case, actually, in which we had also, it is a bit different. There was the name of an ingredient. We were talking about decknamen, code names. So there was a name of an ingredient. Someone else, in a marginal note, actually interpreted as a different ingredient. Was basically the name of a plant that was interpreted as quicklime. And we noticed that if we don't use quicklime, the reaction doesn't work. And so on. In that case, I think it was a clear sign that at least some later reader was trying, to make the recipe work, basically. So, but not really in the transmission of the text. They are the only two examples that so far we could let's say link to the experimental reconstructions. At the beginning, I hoped I could discover a bit more, to be honest, but we are still in the process of looking at it. Yeah.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. I just want to provide a data point that's kind of interesting to myself, because for a long time I was wondering, for example, if you boil your egg for too long, then when we look at the outside of the yolk, it's kind of greenish, grayish green. I was always wondering what that was. So I looked it up. Actually, it's a compound of sulfur, exactly as you're mentioning the produce of sulfur water. That's kind of interesting. Another data point I want to ask, I mean, kind of a question is, I mean, obviously I'm from China originally. So when we were young, we were told that for the first empire of China, so he unified China at the time around 200 BC, and there was rumor that his tomb was actually surrounded by Mercury River, and that was again so much earlier than the data you provided, right? So you said the Alchemy China is around like 13 to 14 or even later centuries. So I just wonder if there are earlier data points around, for example, Mercury in the Far East from your study.
Thank you very much for both the remark and the question. For the remark, indeed, I mean, we are trying to have a kind of chemical analysis of the distillates. It's not easy at all because dealing with organic, let's say, material is much more difficult than with inorganic. So we are trying to set up a kind of chemical analysis. But we did some kind of test, and sulfur is certainly there. So I think the kind of chemical mechanism behind these reactions, the divine water and the distillate of eggs, is very similar, actually. This is a guess, still is an hypothesis, let's say, but I think we are trying to work in that direction. As for the alchemical tradition in China, of course, the history of the Chinese emperor and the river of Mercury in his tomb are quite intriguing and are much earlier than the text that I mentioned. So I think there is a big question in general in the history of antiquity is about the connection between China and ancient Greece and Egypt. Usually we assume that this kind of cultural influence began with the Arabic tradition. So we do know that, for instance, in the Arabic tradition of medical texts and alchemical texts, we have influences from China. But on the other hand, the alchemical tradition in China is much earlier. So if we can assume a kind of influence at this level of chronology that is Greco-Roman Egypt, this is still a question mark, basically. But we do see similarities, of course. I think what was interesting and intriguing in this story about the river of Mercury, river of Tin, is actually the mention in the Chinese sources of this, let's say, Syrian country, or maybe Byzantium. This might be an explicit reference to the Byzantine or the Syriac tradition. And we do know that through the Syriac, many, let's say, Greco-Roman knowledge was, with the Silk Road and the Christian moving around the Silk Road with this, I forgot the name, but there was discovered a very important archive of text in Sogdian along this Syriac, this Silk Road, where basically we could detect Sogdian translation of Greek text. So for sure there was a transfer of knowledge. We don't know basically the chronology when it started, and this is still a question that I think we should try to answer, because the traditional narrative according to which the Arabic tradition is the link between China and the Western, if let's put it this way, alchemical tradition is still, I'm not sure that is the true actually is. Okay, so it's, but thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I thought this was an absolutely fascinating subject. Towards the beginning of your lecture, you briefly mentioned Pliny the Elder and a few of his discourses on metallurgy. I was wondering how influential such ancient Greek and Roman authors were on the development of kind of the alchemical tradition within the East.
Thank you. I think this is a difficult question, but in a way, I think some technologies that were described by Pliny the Elder can be traced in the alchemical text, in the alchemical literature. For instance, all this technology about grinding cinnabar, and there is also the description of how to distill cinnabar, because this was another way for extracting mercury, can be actually detected in Pliny, very often in Dioscorides, and we know that the connection between Pliny the Elder and Dioscorides is a bit complicated because they probably refer to the same sources. And we can see this kind of sources also in the alchemical literature. One of the earliest alchemical texts that we have, this Leiden papyrus that I was mentioning in the lecture, at the end of the papyrus, we have a section taken from Dioscorides. One of the entries is about Mercury, and basically the information we get there are the same that we read in Pliny. So for sure there is a connection. But I think at some point, some specific technologies were developed within the alchemical tradition, and these are a bit different from what Pliny the Elder described. But for instance, Pliny the Elder is a very important source for this kind of pseudo-epigraphical tradition of Democritus. According to him, there were texts circulating in the 1st century AD, where someone was describing how to make fake gemstones. This is something that is usually connected to the pseudo-Democritian tradition in the alchemical, side. So I think there are connections, especially from a kind of technology that is described by Pliny and cannot be really, identified as alchemy, but then was used within the alchemical tradition.
Okay. When I was in high school, for my final year, I did my own research project, and my area of focus was actually alchemy. And so I've forgotten some parts of it, but at the end, what I did my last little bit on was, are you aware of the writings that Jung does about alchemy? Yeah. So obviously that very much goes against your research, because he, for everyone else, he kind of says that alchemy wasn't something that people really believed was going to work, but that it was a psychological process, or they were trying to achieve something within themselves. So, first, just your thoughts on, the ideas he offers on alchemy, and then second, in pursuing these experiments, did you, at any point feel as though you were, working some kind of inner alchemy, or did you think about that analogy at all?
Thank you very much. I think this is a crucial question from an historiographer point of view, and also for the methodology that we're trying to adapt to the history of alchemy. And of course, Jung is a very important interpreter of the alchemical tradition, and is not by chance actually that one of the texts that he was commenting on is actually Zosimos of Panopolis' visions or dreams. This is, and in his opinion, when he discovered Zosimos of Panopolis was the moment in which he started developing his theory of unconscious or archetypes. So there is a very strong connection between Jung and Zosimos. But I think sometimes Jung is misinterpreted, in the sense that it's true that in Jung's opinion, of course, alchemy has the kind of inner spiritual or psychological value. And in his opinion, an alchemical transformation aims to transform the soul, if you want, okay, or the psyche of a human being. But on the other hand, he doesn't say that alchemy didn't work in the lab. In his opinion, it's important, the material, let's say, experience, because it's through the material experience. It's a kind of mirror to which your unconscious can be reflected. So if you don't have the mirror, there is nothing happening inside your body or inside your soul, if you want, okay? So I think this is one part of my answer, let's say. I think even within the Jungian tradition, in this very if you want, psychological interpretation of alchemy, we have to recover the material side of alchemy in order to have a full idea of what Jung had in mind. On the other hand, when we look at Zosimos, we have to contextualize him, of course. And I think in his mind, there was no distinction between operating on the matter and operating on the human body. When he describes, for instance, in the visions, the laboratory work, he uses a lot of metaphors from the soul. This is a way of of making matter more spiritual. At some point, he claims. So I think we are within a different cultural framework. So, and what is interesting in the history of ancient alchemy is to see how practical knowledge can be conceptualized in such a way. So it's the difference, actually, that we have in the text in comparison with what we think about modern chemistry. So the two points of view are not mutual exclusive, if you want, okay? We can try to integrate the two readings of alchemy within the same framework if we detach ourselves from the modern point of view, of course. I don't know if my answer is clear, but... I appreciate it. Oh, thank you.
We'll take our last question.
Well, thank you. This actually, I think, has some points of contact with what you were asking. I'm interested in the question of personnel, because clearly there's something very important in the experience of the alchemist, both in terms of the body and in terms of the interiority of the alchemist. And yet often with ancient technical literatures, we're not reading the writing of people who actually practice these things, whether they claim to or not. And, you know, there's a sort of, it's a generic feature of some of these. So first of all, it's interesting that these alchemical writings seem to be quite different in that way. And second, I wonder if across the different traditions that you're looking at, whether they preserve this same relationship to the personnel, or whether you find that in some of these times and places you do have people who are using basically laboratory assistants or who are working on a more theoretical level. Does that change in different times and in different places?
Yeah, I think we have differences, of course, according to also differences in the different traditions. Very often, for instance, all the Syriac tradition, at least the tradition linked to Zosimus, is very practical. Of course, when I say practical, it means we have a lot of recipes. And sometimes these recipes, they don't mention explicitly personnel or who is doing the technique. It's just a set of instructions, basically. And in other cases, Zosimus refers to all the people working in the temple, probably in the Egyptian temples. And in that case, we can have a kind of sense of the people that were working around him. And then we have also a kind of influence from a kind of very practical technology, like cookery, for instance. There is a very nice passage in Zosimus again, where he claims to have been in the kitchen of his pupil, Eusebia, looking at the cook, how he was working, or was boiling a special, I don't remember which kind of substance, was boiling something in any case, and he could get a kind of experience from there and reuse it in his own alchemical practice. So sometimes we have this glimpse into the real laboratory work, but very often, even if we are in a very practical context, we have recipes. And the recipes, of course, are a bit anonymous, of course, and they don't have this kind of knowledge, of course. And so that's a bit difficult, of course, but I think that's why it's important. Reconstructions are important, because also through reconstruction we can try to experience what was happening, of course. And this was my idea.
That's really fascinating with the cook, sort of, bringing back in the experience of people who are differently socially positioned as part of these communities of practice. I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for your generous questions and attention, and thank you for coming, and thank you, of course, always to our marvelous keynote and Professor Martelli for this excellent.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you very much.